Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, and Henry VIII, heretics or reformers. Martin Luther, born in Eastern Germany in 1483, went from a regular monk to a reformer in direct opposition to the Catholic Church. Although Luther had intense worry and little assurance regarding his salvation in the beginning, he would ultimately begin a trend of questioning the Catholic Church's authority and throw open the doors for reformers such as Calvin Zwingli. Luther was studying to become a lawyer, a dream his father had always held for him until 1505, when he was caught in a brutal thunderstorm and swore a vow to Saint Anna, the mother of the Virgin Mary and the patron saint of minors. He vowed that if she spared him, that he would become a monk. Although he knew it would disappoint his father, he followed his vow to God and entered the Augustinian monastery at Erfurt. Upon entering the monastery, Luther participated with great fervor and enthusiasm in the life he had chosen, but found little comfort. He spoke often with his mentor, Johann von STAUPITZ, about his doubts. STAUPITZ advised him to focus on Christ rather than himself in his journey for assurance. In 1513, he began to teach lectures on the Psalms and ends up developing a great respect for the writings of St. Augustine. Through teaching, he begins to find the assurance that he has been searching for all his life. He began to use tools and translations of humanists such as Verve and Erasmus. His study of the Greek New Testament led him to abandon the old medieval interpretation and look for the literal truth of the text. He believed that he would find this truth by first having a good knowledge of the original language that the Bible was written in. From this extensive study, he comes to understand the righteousness of God in a new light. Rather than our deeds providing us with God's grace, which was a commonly held belief at the time, Luther understood this concept as a beautiful gift from God, separate from anything we can do. This was in direct opposition to the sale of indulgences, and with his 95 Theses, he ordered Archbishop Albrecht of Mainz to stop the selling of them. Following this, Luther goes head-to-head with Thomas Cardinal Cajetan, asking him to point out the mistakes he has made in his reasoning. He is not taken up on this offer. This challenging of the Catholic Church ultimately led Luther to the path of excommunication. He was called back by Emperor Charles V at the Diet of Worms, but cannot recant what holds to be the truth. Luther's ideas are taken even further by John Calvin, who was born in France in 1509. Calvin was a radical theologian whose heretical ideas challenged the Catholic Church's authority. Educated in the city of Paris, Calvin learned to read the Holy Scriptures and interpret them for himself. The conclusions he drew differed greatly with the teachings of the contemporary Catholic Church. Like any truly heretical theologian, he considered it his duty to spread his findings and enlighten mankind. His platform was built upon ideas such as the omnipotence of God, predestination, and the imperativeness of creating an ideal Christian society. As one can imagine, the Church did not take kindly to any of this. In response to the ill reception of his ideas by the Catholic Church, Calvin and his supporters began breaking ties and instead creating a reformed movement of churches. This movement was later evolved by theologians such as Thomas Cranmer, Charles Wesley, and George Whitefield into what is today referred as to either evangelical or Protestant. The lasting significance of this lies in the prevailing prominence of Protestant denominations in society today. Although many reformers have shaped this sector of the Church over the centuries, John Calvin produced the first true Protestant systematic theology. Ulrich Zwingli was a minister born in 1484 and educated at the University of Basel. At the age of 22, he was ordained and called to priesthood in Glarus. After preaching there for a decade, he left Glarus to minister in Einsiedeln. 2 years later, Zwingli was called to fill the vacancy at the great minster of Zurich. There, he preached in support of a group of laborers that broke the Lenten fast in order to keep up their strength. If this was not heretical enough to rouse suspicion that he may have reformist values, his preaching against the practice of hiring out Swiss mercenaries was. In January of 1523, the Council of Zurich held a disputation, a public discussion based on logic and reason, to discuss Zwingli's views. It was here that the priest debuted his 67 articles, which explained his beliefs, especially those regarding the authority of Scripture and the centrality of Christ in Christianity. The council decided that Zwingli's views were sound, and that all preaching should be scripturally based. It was at this point that Zurich and its churches broke away from the authority of the Catholic Church. Zwingli's Reformation was slow and calculated, and therefore was very successful. Its doctrine differed from Martin Luther's in only one main point. Luther believed that the Eucharist turned into Christ's body and blood, while Zwingli saw the Eucharist as a memorial remembrance. In other words, a representative of Christ's body and blood. Though this created a religious rift between Zwingli and Luther, the Swiss Reformation was no less a threat to the Catholic Church than was the Reformation sweeping the rest of Europe in the 16th century. Last but certainly not least is Henry VIII, one of the most influential kings England had ever seen. He is most remembered for his break with the Catholic Church, rooted in the Pope's refusal to give Henry VIII an annulment with his current wife, Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon was originally the wife of Henry VIII's older brother, Prince Arthur. However, Prince Arthur died, and thus Catherine later became Henry's wife as soon as he was of age. In 1516, Catherine gave birth to a daughter, Princess Mary. However, Henry had always had a strong desire for a son, and Catherine was aging. To make matters worse, Henry had already fallen in love with Anne Boleyn. So, Henry requested that the Pope annul his marriage with Catherine, which was a request that was denied. This sparked Henry VIII's strong anti-papalism, and he became anti-clerical and opposed to the authority of the Pope. At this point, he began to envisage royal supremacy. First, Henry VIII summoned Archbishop Thomas CRANMER to aid the annulment of Henry's marriage. CRANMER made plans for the Act of Appeals that would allow him to make the final decision on Henry's colonial case. Because Henry was so sure that the annulment would be successful, he began to spend a lot more time with Anne Boleyn. She became pregnant, and they were secretly married. 4 months after this marriage, the Act of Appeals was made official, and his first marriage was annulled, leading to his marriage with Anne Boleyn being confirmed. Henry believed that there were serious abuses inflicted by the Catholic Church. He was anti-papal, and was against anything he believed to be associated with the Catholic Church, including superstition and idolatry. Henry was so anti-papal and anti-clerical that he shut down all of the monasteries in England, and those suspected of papal sympathies were threatened and punished. However, Henry was not a fan of Lutheranism either. He rejected the Lutheran doctrine of justification by faith alone. In Henry VIII's religious policy, he desired to purge the abuses of the Catholic Church and put forward a uniform religion. This all came together in his Act of Supremacy, which recognized the king as the head of the church. The Canterbury Cathedral was the ultimate manifestation of his newfound church, the Church of England. The Church of England still exists today in the form of the Anglican Church. Henry VIII died at age 55 due to complications with obesity, but he left a legacy that would never be forgotten. Although his purposes of splitting from the Catholic Church were morally questionable, his overall questioning of the Catholic Church puts him in the same realm of reformers such as Luther, Calvin, and Zwingli.